In today's video, I'm going to show you how to build this entire app step by step. We're going to create the home screen. It's going to be a responsive design, so depending on if you're looking at your phone or some other smaller screen, it's going to be completely adjusting to what screen size you've got in there. And I show you how to set up all of this. And we've also got an admin area, which we can add additional areas right here, or we can add sub areas by clicking these buttons. Again, a very interactive app. And if we go to our admin areas, I'll show you how to set the admin areas up here, as well as the SharePoint list that is the foundation for this app. Now in our SharePoint list, I'll show you how to set up 3 SharePoint lists, and I'll also talk a little bit about portal dynamics and how you should kind of consider your portal setup here. But then I'll also show you how you can use different SharePoint lists to support your app as well. Now in this case, we're using the areas and the sub areas as essentially lookups. So we add our different areas and sub areas in here, and then we can pull those into our app. And it'll be every user having their own unique list of items. So I'm gonna show you how to set all of that up. And then finally, if your apps look like this, I'm gonna show you how you can get rid of this so that it looks more like this. So we don't have that bar at the top of the screen here. I'm gonna show you how to do that. So definitely stay tuned till the end of this video. It is a really long video, but it is an entire app covered as part of this process. Now don't forget, if you like this kind of content or you find some value in these videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in. So the first thing we need is a place to store the data that we're going to put inside this app. And I recommend when you create apps that are kind of single focus, they're not necessarily related to, say, like the project management stuff that we've been doing on this channel, where it's kind of its own niche or kind of its own area, you create a SharePoint portal to house that entire app's data sources. You could also use a SharePoint portal to house multiple apps, but the key thing is that you keep it away from where you've got a lot of different people coming into it. Maybe there's a lot of visitors or there's a lot of different traffic that's coming to the portal, say like a project management portal where people are checking the status of the project. You don't necessarily want to put your apps inside of that same portal, because that portal is going to get very busy very quick with a lot of different app portions. For example, you might have a SharePoint list for the lookups, and you might have a different SharePoint list for the activities, or you might have a whole bunch of different SharePoint lists that comprise a single app. And then you start adding more apps into there. All of a sudden, you've got 10, 15, 20, 30 different lists that support these different apps that run on that portal, in addition to what that portal's primary focus is of project management or some sort of communication portal. So my recommendation is that you try to separate your apps into a standalone SharePoint portal. Now in this case, we created a portal for task management, and this is where we're going to house this. This could also be, tools and apps or something like that. You could put a whole bunch of different projects inside of this one portal. And I might rename this in the future. This is just for demonstration purposes. This particular app doesn't actually have a lot of different data sources. Some SharePoint-based apps have 10, 15 different SharePoint lists. That is definitely a situation where you might want to have just a single portal for that app, just to make it a little bit easier should you have to come in here and debug an issue in a specific app. If you've got a whole bunch of apps in the same portal, that gets more complicated because you've got a lot of different SharePoint lists that have nothing to do with that particular app that you're currently debugging. So just kind of food for thought on how you might want to set this up. Now let's go ahead and get started here, and we'll do site contents, and we'll create a new SharePoint list. Now this is going to be our primary list where we're going to put all of our daily task completions. We'll go ahead and call it that for right now. Now, if it is a portal that is designated just for that app, you could just go ahead and show the list of navigation. That way it's very easy to get into. And in this case, I'm going to do that 99% of the time. When it's a high traffic portal, I'll uncheck this because I don't want people having access to the underlying data. In this case, we're building an app where the goal is they do everything inside of the app, and there's very little, if anything, done in the actual underlying data sources. So we'll go ahead and hit the create button here. Now for the title, let's just go ahead and rename this. So we'll go to column settings and rename, and we're going to say this is the activity that was completed. And again, it'll just be kind of a text enter for that. And let's go ahead and add a column, and this will be a text column. So let's hit next here. And this is going to be our area. Now, The single line of text is probably sufficient. It doesn't really need to be 255 characters. I can't imagine that an area would be 255 characters, so this could probably be limited down to maybe 100. But we'll just leave it as 255 just to give the flexibility. We really don't want this to be longer. And what are we talking about when we say area? And we're going to have a sub area also. So an area might be a project. For example, creating this app is an example of a potential project that somebody would have. So you would have an area of this project, and then inside of that project, you have sub areas of potentially Power BI and development, or Power App development, or meetings associated with the different. So you essentially break down the entire workload of what's going into a particular area by sub area. So you can actually visualize that in a Power BI report or in some sort of a charts or something like that in the future to see how much time you're putting into a specific area of a specific project, functional area, different tasks that you might have. So that'll be the benefit of doing this. Now, we're not actually going to enter the information into this app directly from this selection here. So we're not going to use like a choice column. We're actually going to have another SharePoint list that's going to house all of our areas and sub areas. So we are going to mimic a choice column, which is what I think a lot of people would normally want to use as a choice column. And you could use a choice column in here. That actually works as long as you enable that the user can add their own options, because you don't want to have to go back into the app and continually update the choice columns. But that is an option. So if you like using choice columns, because maybe you want to use the SharePoint list interface to actually kind of look through and see everything that's in there, I'm building this app in the sense that the user kind of has the say on everything that's going in there. Now, a manager could still give some guide rails in left or right, because you could also build this so the manager could take a look at it as well. But for right now, we're just going to use a text field, but do realize you could use a choice field. Just make sure that the user can add their own entries into there. Let's go ahead and hit save. And then let's add our sub area one also. And again, we'll just hit save. Now let's go ahead and add another column here. And this one's going to be a number column. So let's hit next here. And this is going to be our time, and number of decimal spaces, we'll say 0. And let's go ahead and hit save here. Now let's go ahead and adjust this right away. I don't like the name of time as its actual name, so we're going to say estimated time taken, and we'll put it in minutes. Most functions that we do, or most sub areas or areas of what we're working on, is in minutes. It takes a 15-minute meeting, a 45-minute meeting. We spend a couple hours doing some sort of a development maybe, and then you would want to put that into minutes in here. But for the most part, we divide our days up into blocks of minutes that we spend doing different things. You could also use hours. Just realize that now you're talking decimals when maybe you've got a 15-minute meeting or a 5-minute quick catch-up meeting or something like that. And that's a lot harder for the user to do mental gymnastics on the conversion. So it does tend to work a little bit better to put everything into minutes. Now keep in mind that when you do visualizations or charts and things like that, you can use transformations, especially in the Power BI side, to transform this into hours. So you can actually visualize this in the number of hours spent doing whatever you're talking about, production, enhancements for different apps, or how long does it take to do an app development. That's a lot of times that's how I've seen these things being used, is in the app development world, where you want to see how much time it takes to build apps or how much time it takes to do the coding for different things. So that's where something like this can be really beneficial, because you can give a pretty good estimate of how long it's going to take to build an app based on if you've got one person, 3 people, a team. So you can kind of give a customer the estimate of the development cost and timeline based off real world examples in the previous developments you've done. So let's go ahead and hit save here. Now, as far as our core requirements, that's actually all that we need. Now you could add other things in here depending on what your use case is. And for example, we'll put an example on here of, we'll do a yes, no, and we'll say next here. And maybe we have a weekly update requirement, and you have to provide an update to your boss on what did you do this week. Well, you may say add a weekly update checkbox here. So you can flag which ones are the things you want to brief to your boss at the end of the week, right? Or you could create an automation to send everything that's been flagged to you at the end of the week to satisfy that requirement. You can kind of forward it along to your manager. Or if you know that you've done everything right and you got everything set up, you could have it sent directly from the app to your manager and kind of bypass that. I don't usually recommend that because usually you want to fine tune it and, maybe you wrote it one way and you want to kind of revise it in retrospect before you send it to your manager. But that's an option you can do also. So we'll go ahead and hit save here. So that's like a weekly update requirement. I think most people have a requirement to update their bosses on what they did during the week, or maybe it's within the month, and you could change this to say like a monthly update, whatever works for your situation. Another thing that we all typically have as a requirement, so we'll add this, is our performance evaluations. So maybe all of our weekly updates or all of our monthly or whatever we flag as being important enough to brief our bosses on, maybe all of those things are also something that we want to capture at that end of the year closeout of your performance or your performance reviews or whatever the process is in your company. You could also separate it and say, yeah, this was important for the weekly, but I don't necessarily want all of that stuff that I have to kind of clean up and polish before I send it to my boss for my end of year review. So I want to have an option for kind of like our performance eval stuff. So we'll go ahead and give an option there for this. That way we could, again, create an automation and say everything that's entered between this date and this date, I want to send it to myself in kind of a table formatted email so I can take a look at modifying that and turning it into a product that I send to my manager, right? We want to make these tools as beneficial as possible to alleviate some of the work that we're going to have to do in the future. We're already putting all this information into this app. We want to make it useful for other functions also. So let's go ahead and hit save there. And I'm not sure if I'm going to cover the usage of these as part of this video. I guess it depends on how long the video runs, but I might explain how you could use these in a future video, depending on, again, how things go for the build of this video. Now, one consideration is the title field is limited to 255 characters. It can never go above that. So if you know that you're going to want to have people put more content than 255 characters in there, you're going to want to add a field dedicated specifically for longer activities. So you won't necessarily need the title field in that case. So just be aware of that. The limit is 255 characters. Go put that into a Word document so you can see how much text that is. It's not a lot of text. So if you want to be very detailed on what information you're putting in your activity field, you're going to want to use a different text field option that allows for greater than 255 characters. That's it for this one. Let's go ahead and create our next SharePoint list. So we'll hit New, List. Now this is just going to be our areas. So we'll go ahead and add this in here. Now this one's really easy. We're just going to change the name of this. So we'll go ahead and rename this. And this will just be our area. And hit save. Now we don't actually have to add any other columns, but I did want to draw attention to something. So let's go ahead and modify this view. The reason why we don't have to add any other columns is because most of the information we need is already here with the created and the created by. We're going to leverage these across all of the lists that we're creating here. Every time somebody creates an area, it's going to record when it was created and who created it. And what we're going to use this for is multiple users. So one user can have their own list of areas and sub areas that are unique to their use case. So for example, somebody might have an area that is a meeting all by itself. Maybe it's not even under anything. Maybe the meeting is the whole point of it. Again, there's going to be some policy type information that would have to come down from management on how to use a tool like this, on what they're kind of looking for. For example, a meeting is rarely its own thing. A meeting usually falls under, for example, a team meeting, right? And somebody might put that in as its own thing. Another person might say, this is the team name as the area, and the sub area is the meeting for that team. So again, there's a little bit of that needs to happen in here. Now, we're not going to cascade these things. So we're not going to say this area has these specific sub areas. You could do that, With the SharePoint list, you have to be careful, especially with the number of people that are going to be using an app like this. If you're talking about, say, a 50,000 person organization and everybody's using this, I actually recommend that you use a Dataverse approach. And we're going to cover how to build this app using Dataverse also. So that'll be a future video. We're going to build this entire app first with SharePoint, and then I'm going to show you the exact same approach using Dataverse. And Dataverse is much more scalable. It works a lot better when you're talking millions upon millions of rows, which in the case of a 50,000 member organization or greater, or even a couple thousand, if every single person, the focus areas and sub areas alone, you could have 50, 100, 200 different options inside of something like this. So just keep that in mind. Is SharePoint works great for 5,000 and below. Yes, you can get it to work a little bit with larger numbers than that. As a data source, it works great for millions of records. But once you start using Power Apps with it, you really start to run into some serious issues when you're talking about 5,000 records and above. So just keep that in mind. This works great for small teams, but you might want to deploy a version of this app for each organizational element, depending on kind of what the requirement is. So just keep that in mind. All right, so that's all we need for our areas. Let's go ahead and create another list for our sub areas. And let's go ahead and create. And again, a very easy one. All we're going to do is change the name of this to sub area and hit save. And again, we've got that created and that created by in here, so we'll have that information when we start to go into our app development. Now, those are the only three right now requirements that we have for this. Now, you could add a whole bunch of other things into this as well, depending on what your requirements are. But for this basic app, that's really all we need. Again, a very, very simple app, not a lot of data sources required. All right, let's go ahead and start the Power App process of building this out. All right, so for our app, I just started off with the responsive design. Let's go up to our settings and make some adjustments. And for this, we're going to turn on our modern controls and themes. And so let's go back to our general tab for a second. Let's go ahead and call this the task tracker, and that'll be the name of this particular app. And let's go ahead and hit close here. Now let's go ahead and adjust our theme right away. So I always add a personal theme in here, and it'll be Office Solutions Pro, and it'll be Arial, and it'll be 0770V8, and we'll hit create. And don't show and enable. All right, so that is the start for our particular app here. Let's go back to see everything that we've got here. Now let's go ahead and change this to our home screen. And then what I'm going to do is make it so that it's easy to copy this as another screen. So let's go ahead and call this container home screen. And this will be our container header home screen. And what I'm doing is I'm making it so that when I copy and paste this, all I have to do is change the home screen for every object on the screen. So I can just do a replace, and when I've put this new page in there, all of the controls will have the name of the screen inside of the name, and it'll just make it a lot easier to replicate this and not have to worry about changing all these things on every single page. We'll just do it once, and then we'll do a replace all to fix this. All right, so now all of the controls have been changed here. Again, that'll just make it easier for us to copy and paste. Now let's go ahead and bring in some of our components that we've created. So we'll go up here and we'll look for our component libraries here. And we're going to bring in our app header. Now I did make some adjustments to this. I did a video on how to create this app header. I'll put the link up in the right-hand corner right now, so you can go check that out if you're interested in checking it out. I did make some changes to it in order to put it into a responsive design here. So just be aware that it won't necessarily work for a responsive design right out of the box. You might have to make some adjustments. And for most, and this includes this particular app here, I don't necessarily go through all the troubleshooting steps to make sure that every single thing works perfectly. So when you do a component or an app, you'd always do some sort of test to make sure everything is working the way that you intended it to. So you might have to do some fine adjustments to get everything up and running perfectly the way that you have it here. If you follow that video and then just add some responsive controls, it's actually actually very easy to change the app header to make it responsive. But if you want me to do a video for responsive component headers, let me know in the comments. I can do that. I can put that together because there are some adjustments you have to do for responsive setups versus the way that I built this originally. All right, let's go ahead and add this in here. We'll take a look at how this looks. So we'll look at our app header here. And let's go ahead and change our width. So this will just be parent.width. And then let's go ahead and change our borders. We're going to go with a square design on this particular design. And then let's make our height the same as our parent. That way it fills the space correctly. All right, let's go back to this view. I'll make it a little bit bigger. And again, we'll change the name here. So this will be our app header home screen. All right, let's go ahead and set our component height here to parent.height also. And then we've got everything filled in. Now let's go ahead and make some adjustments. Now I also have a video on a left side navigation bar. I'm not going to use that in here. For galleries, it doesn't work great for a responsive design. What we're going to try to do is, if we take a look at the play button here, let's go ahead and go into the cell phone view here. What we're going to do is our side navigations is going to fill this space here. Well, a gallery doesn't change like the tab list does. So we're going to use a tab list in this particular app to kind of set this up. A gallery, when you use like a normal navigation component, it doesn't allow for changing its vertical and horizontal. You could do is you could duplicate the component and make one for each scenario, and then basically just make one invisible and then make one visible. That's a lot of work. I think we'll just go with a tab list for this particular design. Let's go ahead and go back to our main screen here. And let's go ahead and change our bottom here. So we want this to be none. So we'll get rid of that border that we were seeing there for a second. And let's go ahead and go to our app. We're going to make some adjustments here to our OnStart. Now what we want to have is some user information for everybody that comes into this app. And I've got that as a template, so I'm just going to paste that in here. And then we'll just make this a little bigger. And I go ahead and delete this and delete these extra spaces in here. And essentially what we're doing is we're looking at the user of whoever's in here, and then we're going to set some variables. We're going to have the full user information, so we'll have access to everything that the user is. And then we want to have something that's the user name, and then we want to have the user email address. That way we can leverage these for patches or saves or however we set this app up on every screen. And we've only done this one time, so it doesn't do a lot of data draw as part of this. So it's not going to be a huge hit in performance on our app. And this will make it available everywhere in our app. So it's a great use of the OnStart function here. And then we're going to go ahead and create our tab list. Now for this, you actually have a couple different options. You could put it in the OnStart, or you could put it in the formula area here. Formulas is great if you never plan to change it. So you put it in there, you create a name formula, and then that will be it forever. But in the case of a nav bar, most of the time you're going to make buttons visible or invisible based on the logged in user. And for that, it's actually better to put it into your OnStart here as a collection. So let's go ahead and paste that in here. And this is our collection that we're going to create for this. And again, I've got templates for pretty much everything out there. So I just copy and paste things in here. And for the most part, it's the same kinds of things. This is usually what might change is your name of your whatever you're going to do work within. Maybe it's a dashboard, or maybe it's, you know, some sort of form that you're going to put in there. But this one is usually the only thing that changes. And then sometimes I add in their metrics, but a lot of times this admin one isn't visible to everybody. So you would have a role up here of, you know, is a user an admin, is user whatever role they are. And if they are, then they can see these additional features. And then if they don't, then you modify the collection so that the logged in user only sees the information that they should have access to. This is why I typically put this kind of information in your OnStart or in the pages on visible property. In this case, this is going to be on every single page, so it makes more sense to be in the OnStart, but you could also put it in the on visible property for the page as well. Now, what do we have here? We've essentially created our collection. We're going to have the label. This is what's going to be in our tab list when we put that together. Then we're going to have an accessibility label. You are required to make your apps accessible as much as possible. They do have the option for an accessibility label. So what we're going to want to have is that put into this as well. and then we've got the screen. And in this case, my template is always app.activeScreen. It's going to be whatever the actual name of the screen is. Now, in this case, we have named this one the home screen. So we'll go ahead and put that in there. And then this one, we haven't created this yet. I'll do that once we've started replicating this. It is going to be our activity screen, and then we are going to have an admin screen. All right, let's go ahead and make this a little bit smaller here, and we'll go ahead and run that. Now what we want to do is add our tab list here. So let's go ahead and find our tab list. And we can go ahead and set this as our collection. So we'll go ahead and put our collection in here. And you can see that it comes up with this ID number. We have to actually go through and add a field here. So we're going to add our label in here and hit add. So now we can see that we've got our labels in here. All right, so let's see. We've got a lot of different settings we have to adjust to make this responsive. And let's go see what it looks like now. So we can see that this isn't too bad. We're actually kind of looking for it to look like this in the mobile. But then when we switch it to this design, we would expect it to go down vertically. So we want to be able to substitute what we're looking at here. And again, we don't necessarily want it to be this big, take up this much screen real estate on a mobile device when we're looking at it like this. Now, when we're looking at our header bar here, you can see that it's already responsive. Now, for most setups, you would never have this many buttons, so that's why I'm not super concerned about this. Typically, there's like 1 or 2 buttons, and a lot of times with a navigation menu like this, I very rarely put buttons on the header anyway. But normally what you would do is when you're doing responsive designs is you would take a look at what phones you actually have, and then you would kind of build it around that. And essentially we're looking at this left number here. So for example, 480 is going to fit no problems with this design here. Now, if we switch it to say our inverted here, we'll actually have the logo and our text for the header here. And you can decide which ones you want to display or not display given the setup that you're looking for. But so we can see that this is responsive. And actually, if we go to say like the canvas size, for example, we've got the full header bar listed here. So we've got that responsive design up on top here. But again, I rarely ever use all the buttons. So I was less concerned about chopping this off. But this right here is approximately 350, I believe, width. But then you've got the space on the sides here and then the page. So all set, it's probably closer to 380. So when I take a look at a phone here, I can tell that this is probably not going to fit correctly because it's 375, and you can see it's being cut off there. So that's what you would essentially look at is what is this left side for the phones that you have in your area, and then what do you need to have this space correspond to. Now, what I could have done is I could have said, okay, let's change the size of these images, make them a little bit smaller, and then they would have fit better. So that's always an option also if I really wanted to get this fine-tuned in there. But I've never built an app that had every single one of these buttons on there at the exact same time. These are the typical buttons that I have. And actually, to be honest, most of the time, I don't even use a lot of these buttons. Most of the time, the only button I end up having to use is the back button every once in a while. Pretty much everything else I'll actually build into the app design when I'm doing the process. And we're going to focus on adjusting this portion now. So let's take a look at doing that. So first thing, let's take a look at our container. And actually, let's change this while we're at it here. So it'll be tab list, and then it'll be our home screen. Now, when we're doing our settings, we got to be careful. We don't want to have to change the settings as we're duplicating this page. So we're going to try to use settings that allow for easy copy and paste. Because if you copy and paste a setting that, for example, maybe it refers to home screen, when it becomes the new page, it'll be home screen 1 as the duplication. Or, and a lot of times when you're doing it as part of a formula, it'll keep it as home screen. So your formulas will reference other pages, and you don't want to have that happen. So we're going to pay attention to what we're using for our settings as we go through this. But let's take a look at our container here, and we're going to take a look at our width setting. Now, for our width setting, we're going to want to have this as dynamic for our responsive setup. So we're going to do an if statement, and we're going to go with our app.activeScreen.size, and if it's equal to 1, we're going to go ahead and go with parent.width or 150. Now, a screen size of 1 is basically your mobile phone. So if it's a mobile phone size, then we want to do parent.width. Otherwise, we want to have it at 150. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our align in container. And right now it says align and container stretch. We actually want this to be responsive also. So let's go ahead and do an if. And this will be basically the exact same setup. So we'll do app.width, and we're going to do it as less than 600. And if it is less than 2, we're going to do align in container dot start. Otherwise, it's going to be stretch. And there we go. And as we can see, that just basically filled this up. And that's kind of what we were looking for with the align and container. So this setting right here is what we just made an adjustment to. All right, now we want to take a look at our layout align items. Now for this one, we're going to break our rule for how we set this up. We're going to go ahead and put a space here, and if we're going to actually reference our container. So let's go ahead and type our container, and it's going to be our sidebar home screen dot width. And if it's less than 50, we want it to be our layout line items dot center. Otherwise, we want it to be in the start. So let's go ahead and close that out. And I think that's most of the settings that we're going to want to adjust for the container. Let's go ahead and take a look at our tab list now. Now, one of the first things we want to take a look at is our alignment. So let's go ahead and adjust our alignment here. And let's go ahead and, again, this is going to be a responsive control. So let's go do our app width. We want to make it less than 600. And if it's less than 600, we want to do horizontal. Otherwise, we want to do vertical. And basically, it's saying that we don't have enough space. So if I hold this down, we'll see our options here. So let's go ahead and change our width here. So we'll set our width property to parent.width. And then we're going to adjust our minimum width. So let's find our minimum width. And that'll be our parent.width minus 10. So we want a little bit of a gap over here. And let's go ahead and take a look at our max width here. And we want that to be parent.width. And let's take a look at our height. And we want that to be parent.height. All right, so that's looking pretty good there. Now we want to take a look at our default selected item. And as we're going from page to page, this is going to be what sets this to be what's selected, right? So let's do lookup. And for this one, it'll be our collection. And then it'll be the screen is going to be equal to our app.activeScreen. And let's go ahead and adjust our accessibility label here. And that will just be our self.selected.accessible. All right, that's looking pretty good. All right, let's go ahead and play and see how that's looking. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. We have to adjust our height, and then we also have to adjust our height there. And if we scroll it like this, that looks pretty good too. We do want to make this a little bit not as wide, so we're going to adjust our width for that container, I think, a little bit also. So we've got our width. And if we look at this, we have flexible width turned on. So we're going to have to turn that off. And there we go. Now we could actually make this a little bit smaller, but maybe you've got some longer text in here. So we'll just keep it the way that it is right there. And then let's go ahead and adjust our main container here. Now for our main container, let's go ahead and adjust our minimum height. So we'll set the minimum height here to parent.height. And let's go see how that looks. And there we go. We're filling up our space a little bit better. We still want to adjust the height here. So let's go ahead back to this and let's take a look at that container. And let's go ahead and set our maximum height to parent.height. And then we'll go ahead and set our minimum height to 1. And let's go ahead and set our justify vertical to center. And let's go ahead and set our height to 75. And that's roughly the size that it is when it's on the top here. So let's go ahead and play this and we'll see if that looks like it's correct. Yep, and there we go. And now we've got our tab options here. And if we switch to this view, we can see that we've got it set up exactly the way that we're looking for here. Now let's go ahead and adjust our header here. So let's go ahead and go back to here. And again, we're just trying to get everything all set up on this first page so we can duplicate this. So let's go and upload an image here. And I went and uploaded my logo here. And then let's go ahead and put in a header here. And for our header, this is going to be our task tracker. The name of our app will be in here. And let's go ahead and do our username. And this will just be GBL user name. And let's go ahead and do our image. And this will just be GBL user. And as we can see here, we didn't add the image. So let's go ahead and use this one. And then we've got our image. Now, that's for demonstration purposes, so you can see the benefit of having the whole user profile. That way, if you forgot something. But let's go back in here and actually set it. And we'll go ahead and just copy this as our starting point here. And I'll go paste that in there. And this is going to be our image. So let's get rid of this. And we're not going to close it anymore. So we'll put this one in there. And there we go. So now we've got our user email. Well, that's not what we wanted. We want an image. So type in image. And then we'll run our OnStart again. And we can come back over to our nav bar, come down to our user image, and we will say GBL user image. And there we go. Now we've got our image. And again, we just ran that once in our OnStart, and we can reference it on every screen from that point on. Now, the last thing we want to do is take a look at our onSelect property here. We want this to be navigate, and this could be self.selected.screen, and we'll close that off. So now whenever we click this, it's going to execute that onSelect and move us between the different pages. So now we are ready to replicate this page. We've got all the core functions kind of figured out. I guess I could probably turn some of these things off. Most of the time, I don't use these. The only time I use the back button is if it's a page that is kind of deeper than the side here. So if we go to the activity page, for example, I would just click the home page to go back and forth between these pages. But if I'm on the activity page and I click a page that isn't represented here, I would give the user the back button so that they can go back to the page they were previously on. So that's usually where I would use the back button. Most of the other buttons that I've created in here are kind of one-offs. I use them sometimes. It just depends on the situation. So I do like having buttons in here. And actually, I was thinking about redesigning this to have kind of an adjustable button to fit all the situations where none of the existing buttons actually work. So I could have a kind of a pinch hitter button for kind of a random thing that pops up. So that's something I might adjust inside of this design here. I think that would be beneficial. That way I could add a button up here that isn't one of my pre-programmed. But let's go ahead and duplicate this now so you can see the benefit of naming your controls this way. So let's duplicate this. And then all we have to do is go to the search here. And we've got home screen up here, which is what we just created. And we're going to call this the activity screen. And we're going to replace all 9 for this. You can see that everything has been changed. And if we come back over here, every single control has been very quickly adjusted to the new naming convention. And we're going to go ahead and duplicate this again. And now we're going to create our admin screen. So let's go ahead and again, change this. And this time I'm going to call it the admin center. A lot of times I call things admin center instead of screen for the setup. And let's go ahead and replace. And there we go. Now we can go ahead and I'll move this down. I like my admin screen at the bottom. And we'll call this edit activities. And then we go to our admin screen, and this will just be our admin center. And there we go. Now, if I'm on my home screen here, now one of the things we have to adjust is our collection. So if we go to our app here and we do our OnStart, we didn't program those screens that we created in, so we have to adjust this. And this will be our activity screen. And then we'll come down here, and this will be our admin center. And then we'll go ahead and run the OnStart again. And let's go test this. So if we go to the activity screen, it is updated. If we go to the admin screen, we are on the admin screen and it reflects which one we're actually on here. Now, one of the things I like to do is I like to duplicate this one more time. So we'll do home screen again. And now we're going to call it a template screen. And this is our screen for having to do more screens, because as soon as we start building on all these screens, they no longer become great template screens. So now we've got a template screen, and we'll go ahead and move that all the way down to the bottom. All right, so now we have all of our screens set up here. Now for one control, we did use the actual name of something. So what we're gonna do is check that to make sure that it actually copied and pasted correctly and that we aren't doing something that we don't want to be doing here. So we want to take a look at our container here, and we're going to look at our layout of aligned items, and we can see that we've got our template screen name in there. So this copied and pasted and did the replacement exactly the way that we had hoped for. So this will work for us moving forward here. But if you are referencing controls from other screens, a great way to see if you've got that is you go up here and you can do your app checker, and then you'll see some performance issues here. And if we look at these, we'll see that we've got this, which is currently not being used. And a lot of times I don't end up using this particular one anyway. If I get to the entire end of the app build and I haven't used this for anything, then a lot of times I will remove that out of there. But otherwise, it really doesn't matter. And if we go back here, we'll look at this other one here, and we've got the user email, which we're also not currently using. If you had a control that was referencing a control on a different screen, most of the time it's going to show up in here. And then as a reminder, you do want to go through and clean this up periodically. This is something I usually do, usually at the end of a workday when I'm done working on something. I'll try to do some cleanup on this, because otherwise you could have literally thousands of things that you need to adjust in here. So it is a good idea to kind of take a look at making adjustments to this as you go. So for like this image logo accessible label, I'd go through and add an accessible label. Same thing with the user image here. Now in this particular case, it looks like this is probably from our component. So I want to go through and actually adjust that on the component side. That way when it comes in here, it's already up to date. But this is something you want to do check as your accessibilities, and anything that you're having problems or issues with, they'll show up here. Formulas are usually pretty obvious because something on your screen is going to show a problem. But some of the other ones you may not necessarily see unless you click on this app checker button up here. Now, one thing we're going to do is add an image here. So let's go ahead and add an image control for our landing screen. And we're going to go ahead and make the width of this parent.width. And then we'll make our height the same, parent.height. And then let's go ahead and upload an image. All right, so that is the image I'm going to go with for this design. All right, let's go ahead and test this. So let's play the app. Now I did make some changes to the app header here, the component, so that we have this display on here. When you get rid of all the buttons, it was just a blue screen. So I did modify this. That is one of the things with responsive apps. A lot of times your components will need some adjustments based off of either the app or the specific use case. So just be aware that when you're using responsive, components are a little bit more challenging because they're usually designed for specific use cases. So for example, a component that is built for just a normal app will work all the time. Once you start injecting responsive designs, then there's a little bit of adjustment that you typically have to do. Again, you might just have a component library of responsive app headers as an example. So you have different setups depending on what you're trying to do. And you probably will have some similarities at that point between those components at that point. But if we take a look at this, everything's looking pretty good. Everything seems to be working. And if we change this and we go between the different screens, everything is looking fine there. And if we go to the window size, now we've got the full header here as well. Now we don't have any of the buttons obviously displayed on here, but we will have the back button on one of our other screens coming up. So let's go ahead and hit the close here and go back and continue our design. All right, let's go to our template screen. And now we're going to work on our areas and sub areas. So let's go ahead and duplicate this. So we'll duplicate the template screen here. And let's go ahead and find our template screen. And let's change this to templates. We find the right thing. And now this is going to be our areas screen. So we'll just change that and replace all 9 and hit replace. And let's go back to our template screen 1 here and adjust our area screen up here. We're going to call this our area updates. All right, so that's all we really need here. We will need the back button on this one, so let's make that visible, and let's adjust our back option here. And this will just be back, and we can get rid of that. All right, so we are now ready for, let's save this. And let's go ahead and set up our design here. So what we're going to need is a container on the left side and a container on the right side. And it will be a horizontal and what we're going to need here is two containers to start off with. Basically, we're going to have a gallery on our left side that's going to have all of our areas. And then on the right side, we're going to have a form that includes the ability to update or add new items to our area list. So let's go ahead first. We need to have an option that allows for that. So we'll go to a horizontal gallery, and then we'll go ahead and add a container here. And this will be, again, a vertical container. And now let's go ahead and add another container in here. And again, it'll just be another vertical container. So we've got our two sides, and we don't need the coloring here, so let's just get rid of this accent here for right now. So first, let's go ahead and change this. This would be our container gallery area screen, and this is going to be our container form area screen. And actually, let's call this controls. And we'll do the same here because we might have more things that we add in here over time. For example, a search box or buttons and that kind of stuff. So let's just call it controls. And let's go to our form area first. So we want to add a control container. So let's go ahead and add a container here. And this will be a horizontal container. And then let's go ahead and add another container. And this will be a vertical container. Actually, this one doesn't really matter. It's just going to be for the form anyway. Now let's go ahead and name this our container form buttons area screen. And we'll call this one our container form area screen. And then for this side, let's go ahead and add a container for our gallery. And this will be our, let's change the name of this. This will be our container gallery area screen. All right, so now we've got pretty much all the settings here. So let's go to our data sources and add our SharePoint data sources here. And we'll find our task management portal. And we want to add our areas, our daily task completions, and our sub areas. Now for the weekly update or the performance eval updates, we would probably have to add some more SharePoint lists for those as far as the date ranges. But we'll cover that if we have time here at the end of the video. Let's go ahead and connect. All right, now we can go ahead and add our gallery. So let's find a gallery here, and we'll do a vertical gallery. And this again will be our areas. And over here, we'll add our form. And again, this will be our areas. Now, these are going to be very basic designs because it's essentially one field. It's just the area. So these are going to be very easy designs, not a lot of stuff going on here. Let's go ahead and delete the image. We don't have any image requirements. Let's go back to view this, and let's take a look at our gallery. Let's change the name of this. We'll call this our gallery area screen. And let's do the same thing for our form here. So this will be our form area screen. And we don't need the content type here. And again, it pulls in the original name here. So let's go ahead and unlock this. If we go here, we'll unlock it. This is going to be a required field. So we're going to say true. And then we can change the name of this to be the area. And let's go ahead and change the width of this. So the width will be the width. So it fills the entire available space here. That's really the only thing that we need for this. Let's go ahead and add a button here. So we'll go and put a button in here. And we'll go ahead and set this over on the right side, and we'll put it in the center. And let's change the button name to be Save. And we'll add an icon for Save on here. And then for our container, let's go ahead and put a 20 on the right side here to give a little bit of space. And then we'll go ahead and put a gap of 10. If we add any other buttons in here, we'll have a little bit of spacing in there. I might adjust that to 20, but a lot of times I just use 10, so that's kind of my default setting there. And let's take a look at our container. We want to have flexible height off, and then we're going to go ahead and set this to 32. Let's see how that looks. A little tight. Let's go with 42. We'll have a little bit of a space on the top and the bottom there. And let's go ahead and turn off this. We don't want to have any drop shadow there. All right, so I think that's pretty much that. And we can go ahead and say submit form area screen. So we've got that set. And then we can go ahead and do our on success. And we'll go ahead and do a notification. And that'll be successfully updated. And then we'll go ahead and do a notification success. And we'll do a time mode of 3 seconds. All right, so now we've got a quick on success notification. We'll have to do some other adjustments as we build this out. But let's go ahead and take a look at the design here. So we've got subtitle and our title. And again, I like using our modern controls. So let's go ahead and put this in here. And we'll put this spaced out, I don't know, about 10 to the left here for the starting point here. So we'll put 10. I think that's probably a good place to put that. And let's go ahead and change the width to width minus 80. And let's go ahead and put this color. We want to change that. We'll put that as black. And we've got our X already set in here, set away from the edge. And we've got our Y as in the middle. So I think that's going to work. And let's go ahead and change our template height here. So we'll say a template height of 42. And let's see how that looks. I think that's going to work. And let's get rid of this and this. And let's just call this text area gallery area screen. All right, so now we've got our text in there. Now we want to change our height and width here. Let's go with our gallery area screen dot template height. Let's go ahead and copy that. And then our height is going to be the same. So we end up with a box here. It's going to be the exact same height and width. And let's go ahead and change this to, well, let's try 10. That's not so bad. It's a pretty good sized item there. And if we go ahead and change our gallery background, and we'll go with F5, F5, F5. Okay, I'm liking how that's looking. And if we go ahead and take a look at our on select here, let's change what happens here. So we're going to update the context and create a local variable. So we'll call this one local area selected. And we'll say this item. And what else we want to have happen when we click this? We want to do edit form. And we'll do the form area screen. And let's go ahead and close that up. And I think that's good for now. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. Actually, let's close this quick and then we'll make this a little bit bigger. So we've got a little bit more room to work with. And let's go ahead and change the item now based off of the item property that we just created here. So we want this to be our local area selected, so we can select whichever one we're doing there. And we've got our selection button. We might want the ability to delete. So actually we're gonna have to change the width of this. So we'll go with minus 120. And then we'll copy this. And we're going to have to move its X value over a little bit here. And instead of 12, we'll do 42 plus 12 for 54. And then we'll change this to the trash bin here for deletion. And let's take a look at our onSelect for this one. And for this one, we're just going to remove areas, this item. And that's all we need to do for that. And this is now fine with that. Everything looks like it's going to fit. That allows us to delete items very quickly in here. For some reason, if we need to delete, we make a mistake, spelling error, or whatever. Although I do recommend if the user makes a spelling error, that they just change the spelling error without deleting and then re-adding. But I'm sure there's some reason they'll find a reason to delete something. So you got to give them the option to do that. And again, because we're not using a lookup and we're not linking things, deleting something out of here is not going to actually impact the activity roster that we put together. Whatever they put in there from what's already been entered will continue to be in here. All right, let's take a look at our onSuccess again. Let's make a couple more modifications here. We've got some of these other things built for us here. So we want to do another update context. And let's go ahead and put that as local area selected, and it'll be form.last submit. And then let's go ahead and add another option here for edit form. And again, it'll be our form. Why we're doing this is we want this to be set as the variable. So let's say we make a change in the spelling or something like that. We want to make sure we update our variable based off of the changes. So whatever the last submit is, it's going to update and keep everything consistent between our variable that we created. Then we want to set it to edit form so that we can actually see this and it doesn't go to gathering inputs or whatever the text is that pops up here. And then obviously the notification that we created as well. All right, let's go ahead and try this. So let's hit the play button here. Now, we're going to adjust this a little bit later on to make this visible on our screen the way that we're looking for. For right now, let's go ahead and change it this way. And you can see that this is essentially our gallery. So, and because we don't have anything in here, we don't have any ways to add anything in here. So we need to add an option for adding an item. So we'll go through and do that quick. So we'll copy our button here, paste that in there, and then we'll do our option here. This is going to be to add area. And then we'll do the add, and we'll do the accessibility label over here. So we'll say add area, and let's go ahead and change the order of this. We want this over here, and we'll change the name of this. So this will be our button add area screen, and then this will be our button save area screen. And that we're going to change the width of both of these buttons, and we'll go to 120. All right, so there we go. Now to add an area, we're going to say new form area screen, and let's go ahead and play the app here. So if I hit the add area button, now we can type in the box here. Let's go to our full screen here so we can put this in here. All right. That is looking pretty good so far. We're going to adjust obviously all the borders and everything else on this as we go through this. But I don't like that this is blank. We should probably do something here. So we've got our gallery here. If it's blank, we want to have something else happen here. Let's go ahead and select our container here. And let's go ahead and insert a text. And let's go ahead and do a width of parent.width, and let's go ahead and change our height. We'll say parent.height, and for our text we'll say no areas have been added, and we'll go ahead and make that bold, and we'll go ahead and set that to center. And we'll put that in the middle also. All right, so now we've got our gallery. and we've got our text control. But what we want to do is take a look at our visibility property here. And what we want to do is count rows, and it'll be our gallery, all items. So that'll give us a count of everything in there. And we want to say if count rows less than 1, false, otherwise true. And now our gallery is no longer there. And the only thing we've got is our text image there. So if we play this app, what we're going to see is exactly what we're looking for. No areas have been added, and then you've got the ability to add an area and save it in here. So that's kind of what we're looking for setting this up. So let's go ahead and we'll say task tracker application as an area. So let's go ahead and save this. And there we go. So we've got our first item entered, and now we got to make this not visible. So we're going to go ahead and select this and say copy. And then for our visibility property here, we're going to do the same thing. Paste this in, and we're going to say greater than 0. We're going to want to have it as false and then true. So that'll make that only visible probably the first time the user uses the app. It'll make it essentially visible that way. So now we've got one item in here. Let's go ahead and change this. We want to put this in the middle here. And we've got our wrap text turned on, so that looks good. Again, you don't want to necessarily have really long areas. So the odds of this being that long, and you could put the maximums on here also, or right here, you can add a max in here also. So max length here. Now I think we have it at 255 right now. So we'll go ahead and put max length at 255. That way when they reach 255, it won't let them go any further and generate an error. So that's always a good thing to put in here when you're setting these things up. Now let's go ahead and make some other adjustments here. So we've got our containers in our main area. Let's go ahead and put a gap in here of 16. And that's essentially what we've got everywhere else. So we're just trying to keep things consistent. We've got 16 everywhere else. Let's just do it consistently here. So we've got a little bit of a gap there. And for our container here, let's go ahead and get rid of the border, the shadow that we're having. We'll do the same thing on this one. So let's find that container. And let's go ahead and get rid of that also. Now for our main container here, what we can do is give it a little bit of a background text color here so we can make it a little bit darker. And then for this container here on the right side, what we can do is set this to white. And we'll do the same thing for this container. And there we go. I get a little bit of a spacing gap there. And I might want to do is make these a little bit more on the square side. So let's change these containers. We'll give them a border radius of 0 for both of these. All right, so that's looking pretty good. And let's go ahead and test our delete here. And we've got no areas have been added. We've got that little bit of a gray. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Now, when we deleted, we might want to have set the reset here. So we probably want to adjust that. So let's hit play on the app here. And let's go ahead and save again. All right, so now we've got that in here. And let's go ahead and adjust our delete option here. So what do we want to have happen when we delete? Let's go ahead and add another option here. And if we do that, we want to update context. And we want to do the local area selected, and we want to set it to blank. And curly bracket and close. And there we go. Now when we hit delete, it's going to reset the variable that's over here. So let's go ahead and test that out. Well, it looks like we also need to adjust this. So if we hit add an area, and we'll do a test, we'll hit save. So now we have a test over here. If I delete test, it's going to reset this. But again, we'll get that no item to display, so we're going to adjust that also. All right, let's go ahead and close this. And let's go ahead and set our default here. So that'll be our local area selected. And let's go ahead and update this. We want to have a text, kind of like what we did over here on this side. We want to have a text for what to do when there isn't an item. So let's go ahead and insert a text. And again, let's go ahead and make the height parent.height. And then we'll do the same thing for the width here, parent.width. And for this one, let's change the text. Oops, put the parent.height in the wrong place. We'll do the text here in a second. Let's do the height here. And then for our text, we'll say select an item to update or add a new item. And let's go ahead and make this bold. Select an item to view or update or add a new item. Yep, I like that. And I didn't change the font before. Let's go ahead and make this 24. Yeah, that looks fine. And let's put this in the center and in the middle. And let's go ahead and change this text to 24 also. All right, so now we've got that in there. Now we want this to be visible only during certain circumstances. So we want to say is blank, and then our local area selected, and form dot mode, it is unequal to form mode dot new. Now let's go ahead and copy this, and we have to adjust our form visibility also. So let's select our form, and then for our form visibility, let's go ahead and paste that in there. And all we're going to do is adjust this, and we're going to say not is blank. And then we're going to change this to or, and we'll make this equal. All right, so I think that's going to allow us to make this form visible when we need it to, but let's go ahead and test this out here. So let's hit play. So if we delete this, we should see the message on both sides. Now I think I'd already hit add area, so let's give this another try just to make sure that it is or is not working. So let's add our area, and we can see both now. Now if I delete this, we should see the indication on both sides. And we do. And if I hit add area, I can now add an area. So everything's working the way that we want it to work. Let's do task tracker and hit save. And we've got our created item here. Now, if I hit add area here, it's going to put this already into that mode for editing. So when I delete this, it's already going to still show adding an item. So everything's working the way that we want it to work for this. Let's go ahead and back out of here. And let's go ahead and change this, and we'll call this text form nothing shown area screen. And let's go ahead and change this. This is our actual next arrow, and this is our icon delete area screen. And this will be our echo select area screen. We got to adjust our bolding here. We don't like this border. So let's get rid of the border here. So we'll get rid of that. And same thing for this one. We'll get rid of this. And we'll go ahead and move this down here. Again, for screen readers, you want to make sure you put everything in the proper order also. So that's a good cleanup item when you see it, is try to fix those things. And if we go back and take a look at our tooltips, we've got view item details. We don't want that to be it. So let's go ahead and we'll say delete item. And that keeps it general. So depending on what, if we copy and paste this page, this will still work on the next one. And if we go ahead and do this one, we'll say view item details, and that seems to work pretty good for me. So I think that'll work. And if we take a look at this, we have add area. Now, if we copy and paste this screen, we are going to have to change that. And here we'll have to do save areas. So both of those would have to be adjusted. All right, I think that's pretty much it for our area. Everything does seem to be working as we wanted it to. I think that looks pretty good there. Now, one of the things we might want to have is a header on this. And right now we don't currently have a header in here. So let's go ahead and add that in here. So let's go and insert a container. And that'll be a horizontal container. And we'll go ahead and move that to the top. And let's go ahead and change this to none for the drop shadow. And we're going to do a flexible. And in this case, we'll do 32. And let's change the background color to white. And let's go ahead and add a text. Now, this one, we're going to put a left padding of 10, and that should align it with our area here. And let's go ahead and call this area. And then we'll do a middle. That way it's right in the middle of this. I think we've got some space, so I think we could actually make this a little bit smaller. So we'll go to like 25. And let's go ahead and adjust our height here. So we'll set this to parent height. And let's make this bold. And we'll make this 16 to make it a little bit bigger. All right, so now we have our header options here. And what we could do is we could add for delete and for our select item, but I think those are pretty self-explanatory, so we'll leave those the way they are. And let's go ahead and change this. So this will be our label, area, header, area screen. And this will be our container, gallery, header, area screen. All right, now we got to take a look at our main area here, and we want to take a look at how this is going to play on a phone. So if we switch over to our iPhone 11 here, we don't want it to look like that. So let's go ahead and make some adjustments here. And if we select our main area screen here, we want to do wrap. And let's go ahead and hit play. And now we've got our gallery on top and our edit on the bottom here. So if we select this, we have essentially everything that we're looking for here. Actually, that looks pretty good. I think we've got a little bit of adjustment we can make here. It doesn't need to be quite that tall. We don't need as much space. So let's go ahead and adjust that. All right, let's go ahead and adjust our aligning container here. We want this to be stretch. And let's go play this again. And yeah, it looks a little bit better there. Fills that up. Now let's take a look at this. And again, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and try our window size. Plenty of room when you're working with a web browser. And yeah, that looks pretty good. So pretty much everything is looking pretty good on the setup here. So let's go ahead and go back to our iPhones. We're set up for that. It's kind of the more challenging one when you're setting up for the responsive set. So, all right, I think we have everything in here that we're looking for. Now what we need to do, after we have everything all set up, just to make sure that we don't have to make any adjustments later on, what you do is all you have to do is duplicate this. So let's duplicate this screen. And this is going to be our sub areas. So all we're going to have to do is, again, do our search quick, and we'll rename everything. So we've got our area screen here. So let's go ahead and find our area screen one. And we're going to change this to sub area screen. And we've only got one screen. That is something you want to check every once in a while just to make sure that you're not changing anything on a different screen. We're good here. So we're going to replace all 38 usages of this and hit replace. And let's go back and check out our sub area screen now. And it looks like we got to move this back to the bottom. So let's move this down. All right, now we have our sub area screen. So let's go ahead and change this. So we'll call this the sub area updates. Now, everything is currently set for the areas. So we'll have to actually convert everything over to include some of the variables that we created. So we'll have to adjust all of those things, but the design is there. It's already there. If we hit the play button here, we'll see that everything is already set up for it. All we have to do is now direct towards our sub area, and then we'll be done. All right, and I went through and updated all the variables and changed everything over to the sub areas data sources, and we are done. And that only took a couple minutes to do. Let's go ahead and close this. And in the process of that, I did realize we forgot to do one thing. So on our item property here, we don't want everything. We only want the things that we created, and we only want them to be in alphabetical order, probably, but whatever works best. So let's go ahead and first add our filter here. And we want it to be the created by email is equal to our GBL user email. That way we're only going to see the things that we create in here. Now we also probably want to have a sort on this. So we'll do sort, and then we'll do our title, and then we'll do our sort order ascending, and we'll go ahead and close this off. All right, so now we've got that set up. We also need to do the same thing on our area screen. So let's go ahead and head back to our area screen here. And we'll do the same thing. So for our item property here, we want to have our filter created by email is equal to GBL user email. And there we go. And let's go ahead and add our sort on here. And then we can do title, sort order, ascending. All right, and there we go. So it'll keep everything in alphabetical order, making it easier to find what we are looking for. One thing I just realized is you're probably, if you're building this app at home or you're building something like this, you're probably going to want the ability to search, maybe not in the area particularly, but in the sub areas where you could have a lot of different options. You might want to have search, and I should have probably done this before I duplicated the screen, but let's go ahead and add a search in here. So inside of our container on the left side, we want to have a search. So we'll go ahead and insert a container, and we'll do a horizontal container, and we'll go ahead and turn off our flexible height. Set this to 42. I think that'll probably be sufficient. And let's go ahead and move this to the top. So just drag this up here. And we'll go ahead and set the background of this one to white also, and get rid of our drop shadow here. And let's go ahead and set this to 0. And let's go ahead and change our name here. So we'll call this the container search area screen. And then we want to go ahead and add a text input. So let's find our text input option here. And we're going to put this in the middle. Actually, this one, and then we want to put it in the middle here. And we want to have a little bit of space on the left. So we're going to put 10. I think will look okay. Yeah, that looks probably fine. We could probably go 15, give it a little bit of extra gap there. Yep, that looks pretty good there. And then we want to make the width of this to be our parent.width minus 30. So we have the same amount of space on both sides now. And then what we want to do is have some placeholder text here. And for this, we're going to go ahead and say search areas. And we want to have an emoji in front of here. Now my Windows key is not working, so I actually have to use the screen capture thing to pull this up. But if you use the Windows key and the period, most people are going to get the emoji finder. I have to actually use virtual keyboard in order to get this in here until I get my keyboard fixed or replaced. And then what we're going to do is just look for a search, and we'll add that in here and put a little bit of space there. And then we'll have a little bit of a search emblem there. And let's go ahead and change the trigger output to key press. That way the gallery is going to immediately respond to anything that we put in the text box there. And let's go ahead and change this to text search input area screen. And now we want to modify our sort here. All right, so what we want to do is we want to add an extra filter option in here. And let's go ahead and give ourselves a little bit more space here. So let's go ahead and right here within our filter options here, let's go ahead and enter a couple times here. So we've got our GBL user email and we want to add an and then what we're going to do is we want to add a couple different options. So we're going to have another parentheses here. Let's go ahead and enter again here and we'll close it off so we don't forget that we have to do that. And we're going to say is blank and then our text search input area dot value. So basically we want to account for if there's nothing in there, essentially is what we're saying with the search box here. And we want to add an or, and then we want to do starts with, and for this one it's going to be our title, and then it's going to be our text search input dot value. And let's go ahead and close that. And now we can do a search that finds our specific item. So let's go ahead and type in task and we can see it pops up. Now, if we search for area, we'll see our notification here of no areas have been added, and that's not quite right. So we might want to modify our verbiage here if we're going to use a search. So let's go ahead and modify that quick. So we've got no areas have been added, and let's go ahead and just change that to or match your search. And I think we're going to add a little bit of padding on this also. So let's go ahead and put padding on our left of 5 and 5. There we go. So we got a little bit of a padding or offset there. Let's do the same thing for this one now that we saw that that might be a potential issue in the future. Depending on the size of the screen, we want to have a little bit of a gap between the edge. We don't want it to run all the way up to the edge. So let's go ahead and see how that looks now. All right, that looks pretty good. Now let's go ahead and remove this again. Now starts with is not the same as doing search or using in. Search and in are not always delegable with SharePoint. When we use this and we build this a particular app as a Dataverse app, you'll be able to see that you have a lot more flexibility for how you do searches. So for example, if I search for tracker, it's not going to show up there because it doesn't start with that. So the starts with, it actually has to start with whatever that is. So it's a little bit less feature rich on your ability to search for what you're looking for. Again, that's one of the benefits of Dataverse, and most of the stuff that I build is on the Dataverse side these days. Now, I know that SharePoint is really popular, so I have spent a lot of time building SharePoint apps also. But when you realize how much more you can do with Dataverse, you will very quickly make the switch over because everything, especially searches, is just so much easier on a Dataverse side. Now, there are some things that are easier on SharePoint, but for the most part, it is much better to use Dataverse. All right, so let's go ahead and see how this looks if we switch it here. And again, it looks pretty good. So I think that looks like it's usable. Let's go ahead and close back out of here. And I'm going to go ahead and just copy this entire container and put that over on our sub area page. So let's go to our sub area page here. And let's find our container. And we want to put it in this container. So we'll go ahead and paste that in. And then we'll just move it to the top here. Now in this case, we're not going to have, well, we could do an area screen 1. So let's do our area screen 1 here. And let's go ahead and change that to sub area screen. And go ahead and replace our usages of that. And go back here. And let's just make sure that everything is looking correctly. Everything's looking good there. Now all we have to do is modify this to match the same format we just got done setting up. All right, I've gotten and adjusted that. And all we need to do now is change this to say sub areas. And let's go ahead and add that to our placeholder. All right, so now we're pretty much ready to go for this, and we are now ready to work on our admin screen. So we want to be able to edit these different screens that we've created. So we're going to put those in the admin screen. So let's go ahead and in here, we'll add a text box. And we'll go ahead and put that in the center here. And for our container, let's go ahead and center everything. And we're going to go ahead and put a gap of 15. See how that looks. And then at our top, we'll go ahead and put a gap of 15 also. All right, let's go ahead and before we change too much here, let's go ahead and change our width. There's an interesting bug with the text labels. Right now we've got it in the top. Let's go ahead and put it in the center. If you make the text longer than the field and it has to go on to the next line, a lot of times that breaks the ability to put it in the middle. So it's better to make this a little bit bigger before you type in whatever you're going to put in the box there. And make sure that it's going to fit. So you'll say admin options. And that fits. Let's go ahead and make that bold. And that still fits. And let's make this 16. And everything is working as we would like. Now, if it had increased, I would have undone it and then made sure that to make it bigger, because again, you can break the ability to put this in the middle for some reason. I think there's a bug or a glitch with this, and that can be an issue, especially on the GCC side. I haven't actually tested it too much here on the commercial side to see if it's a problem, but I've kind of built up the process of making sure that it doesn't extend beyond the control there. And let's go ahead and add a button now. So we'll say this button, and we'll go ahead and make the width of this 150. That's a pretty good start there. And let's go with areas, update. And for an icon, the pencil's a pretty good one for that. And let's go update areas for our accessibility label. And we can copy this and paste. And now we'll say sub area and see if that still fits. Nope, doesn't fit. So let's go ahead and make these buttons a little bit bigger. We'll go with 200 just to give ourselves a little bit of extra room there. That way, if we added any other buttons that we knew that probably would fit the text there. We could also make them wider and make them look good with 2 rows of text. That might be something we consider if we have some longer options in here. Let's go ahead and change our on select to navigate. And this will be our area screen, and we'll do a screen transition fade. And let's go ahead and adjust our sub area now. And now we're going to do the sub area screen. And there we go. So now if we test this off, let's see how this looks. And if we hit the back button, it will take us back to here. And that looks good. So everything seems to be working there. Now let's go see how this looks in our different options. So if we look at it this way, it's looking good, looking good. And let's go back to here. And everything is working perfectly. So that's exactly what we're looking for. Now we are going to have the ability to edit this from our activity screen also, but it's good to have it in the admin option area as well. That way people can come in here and make edits. Now you could have admin, like admin's user role, admin type stuff in here. And then you would just, again, separate that information where only the admins would see those buttons. A great example might be some sort of a configuration table that you might have to put in here for admins to keep everything up and running. So this is pretty good. That's a good start for this. Let's go ahead and close this. Now we are ready to begin our activities. So let's go to our activity screen here. And we can begin by adding our information on here. So let's go ahead and add a container in here. And this is going to be our, actually before we add this, let's change this. So we're going to set it up very similar to our previous 2 screens for area and sub area, where we have our table or gallery on this side, and then we're going to have the form on this side. So let's go ahead and adjust this. We want to have a horizontal container for our main container. All right, now we can go ahead and insert a container, and we'll put a vertical container, and then we'll do another vertical container also. So we'll have one on each side, and that'll be our form side. And this will be, I think we're going to put a table control in here. So let's go ahead and we'll call this one our container activity form controls activity screen, and then we'll call this one our container activity. I think we're going with the table activity screen. All right, so we've got both of those now. For this one, let's go ahead and add another container. And this one will just be another vertical container here. And we'll go ahead and name this one our container activity table activity screen. And that's the same as the one above it. So we'll say this is going to be our table to differentiate it. And you might be asking why you're doing that. You've already got a container. I could see potentially putting another container in here with potentially maybe search or filter options. So I want to include an option to be able to have other containers in here. So I don't like to have controls all the time with my galleries or with my forms or with my table controls. So I like to have the flexibility of not having to rearrange everything after I've already got everything set up and formatted. So let's go ahead and add a table now. And we'll go ahead and do this table here, and this will be our daily task completions. And we don't have anything in here yet, but we do know we want to filter this to only show our items. So we'll do created by email is equal to our global variable. And for this one, we're going to do sort. We want to have our most current up on top. So we'll do created, and then we'll do sort order ascending. All right, and let's go ahead and format this right away. And it looks good. Okay, so on this side, we're going to add a container for our controls. So that'll be our horizontal container. And let's go ahead and add our form container. That'll be, again, a vertical one here. And now this one, we'll go ahead and change this to none. And we'll take with the flexible, we'll set this as 42 because it's buttons. And then we'll do the same thing here. And then we'll add our form. And again, that'll be our daily task completions. All right, and we don't need content typing in, so we'll go ahead and remove that right away. And then for this one, let's go ahead and make our width a little bit bigger to see if we can fit the full text on this. All right, that looks pretty good. And let's go ahead and unlock this and change this title to be activity description. And we'll go ahead and do this one as parent.width. We want to have to fill the entire space that we've got here. And for this one, let's go ahead and do multi-line for this. All right, and that's looking pretty good. We might also want to make this a little bit bigger on our height. So why don't we go with 64 for our height, just to give the indication that you can put a lot more text in this box than, say, some of these other areas over here. All right, I think that's looking pretty good. Now, we might want to consider how big we want everything to be. Now, this is a responsive design, so we'll take a look at when we get everything kind of set up. Maybe we adjust this. Maybe this is just going to be a single column form. Again, it's going to look kind of funny probably when you're in desktop mode, but when you're inside of a phone, that'll look fine. And what I'm thinking about is the width here. So for example, we don't necessarily know what our width is going to be when you're in a phone. So if you make this too big, it won't fit. And again, we could probably make this responsive, and we might have to do that. But those are some of the things we're going to have to consider when we're taking a look at this. For right now, let's go ahead and copy our controls from our previous screens that we set up, and then we'll just modify those. And we can actually do that for a lot of things in here. So let's go ahead and take a look at our area screen, and we'll go ahead and copy these and move those over here. Paste those in, and we'll go ahead and put this over on the right and in the center, and we'll put a gap of 10. And for our right, we'll do 20, give a little bit of space there. And then for our form, we have to change the name of this. So let's do that quick. So this would be our form activity screen. And then we can go ahead and adjust this. So this would be our form. All right, perfect. And then let's just copy this because we're going to use this again here. So put that right there. All right, perfect. Now let's go back to our screen again for this, and we'll go ahead and do the same with our form on this screen. We'll copy the on success. So let's copy all of this, and we'll go back to our activity screen, and we'll go ahead and use that on success here. And we'll just change this to be, actually, we could just do self.last submit, and that works as well. So you don't have to actually put the form name in there. And then we can do form like that. All right, so that looks good. So we've added both areas here. So we have our add, we've got our save updated, we've got our on success. Now we can actually use some of the same functionality from our button in our gallery here. So let's go back to our area screen, and we'll go ahead and copy this, and we'll copy that and go back over here. Now we'll go back to our activity screen. Now for this, we're going to go to our on select and paste this in. And again, we'll change this to be the correct form. Now we want to change this to be activity. And I think I forgot to do that. Let's do table 2. That's selected. And let's go our save here. Our add area is fine. This is where we have to change this. So this is going to be our activity. All right, I think we have everything set up here. And we might want to add an option for delete. Because we're not using a gallery, we don't have that here. But let's go ahead and take a look at our fields. We don't need this. We'll remove that. We don't need our modified. We don't need our created. And we don't need our has attachments. All right, that looks like everything that we need. Area, sub-area, estimated time, weekly update, and performance eval. Actually, now that I think about it, we might want to add the created date on here. So let's go ahead and add that again, because we want to be able to see when the activities occurred potentially when we're looking at this table. So let's go ahead and do that quick. All right, I think that's probably good. Let's leave the screen and come back so that it refreshes. Okay, so we've got created down there. Let's change our title right away. So this will be activity. And then let's go ahead and change the width of this. So let's find our container here. And we're going to want this to be 2 out of 5. All right, let's go ahead and get rid of that so it doesn't pop up anymore. We want this to be bigger than this area. So let's go ahead and adjust this container size. And we're going to want this to be 4 out of 5. Let's try 5. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. And when we come to this one, let's look at our container, our overall container here. We want this probably, that looks about right. And our form, let's go ahead and make this a 1-column form. Yep, that looks good there. Now what we need to do is add our options here. So let's go ahead and insert a combo box. We want it to be a selection option for the user. So they can pick what they're looking for. And for this one's items, we're going to look at filtering our areas. And it'll be, again, the created by email equals user email. And let's go ahead and see what happens when we click that. So we have our one option, which is good. Now let's go ahead and sort this. And We'll go ahead and sort it by the title, and we'll do sort order ascending. All right, that looks good. Now let's go ahead and change our input placeholder. So we'll say select area. And then let's go ahead and take a look at the controls in here. We want it to be basically the same place that this data card is. So let's go ahead and take a look at our values here. 2436. We'll go ahead and just copy this for our Y. And let's put that in there. And then let's go ahead and copy our width here. Parent that width minus 48. And we'll put that in here. So it's the same, roughly the same place. And this is 24. All right, so now we have it overcoming that. Now let's just copy this one. This kind of helps get rid of some of the errors that pops up. If we now delete this and we put that right here, we should only have one primary error, and that's our update. So we want it to be the selected title. All right, so that's good. Let's go ahead and copy this one and put this in here. And let's adjust this right here. And again, we'll have to grab that Y value here, so it's unique to the content of this one. Let's go ahead and paste that in here because we don't want to reference the other one. And let's do our sub area now. So let's be sub area. All right, so that looks good. Now our item property for this one, let's go ahead and take a look at that also. So this will be sub areas. And then we need to have our single quotes here. All right, so that looks good. All right, we can now copy this one or delete it. And we can go ahead and replace this. And again, we'll have to update our option here. So we want it to be the selected title. All right, let's go ahead and give that a try. So if we hit add area, and then we'll say test activity entry. Now, again, the limit for a title field is 255 characters. So if you need to have a lot more space, you are going to, as I mentioned earlier, add a separate field that allows for a lot of different text in here. It kind of depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for a really, really descriptive, we can go back and you can have a lot of detail, then you're going to want a lot more text. But 255 is a pretty good, decent amount of text. All right, so that's looking good. And let's go ahead and check the box for, well, we'll just do one and hit save. And there we go. We have one entered in there. Now we still have to adjust everything for how everything looks, but this actually looks pretty good how we've got that set up there. Now we might want to adjust our widths here a little bit. And when we take a look at the design of this, we might have to move this add button over here. So again, the reason why I had that container space there, so we could add buttons over here or whatever we need to add, filters and whatnot. For this design, we might hide this. And if we hide this, we won't have the ability to hit the add area button. So this button might have to shift over here. So those are some things we might have to take a look at. We could also put it up here, I suppose. But let's go ahead and take a look at this. Go back out of here. All right, looks like we forgot to do the form item property. So let's go ahead and put that in there. So activity selected. That way when we select this, it'll update here. And let's play this. And now we're ready to actually start taking a look at adjusting everything for responsive designs. So let's go ahead first and fill this up correctly. So we'll take a look at this container. And take a look at our fill is 1. And let's see, our alignment is at the start. We want it to stretch. And then let's go ahead and take a look at our form. And we want our form width to also fill. So let's do parent.width. And then we'll need to adjust our field. So we'll select our title. And if you hold the shift key down, you can select more than one. All right, so we've got them all selected, and we're going to do our parent. and it'll be parent.width. All right, let's go ahead and play. And now we're filling the screen, and let's go to our mobile phone. And again, we'll still have to continue to adjust everything here. Let's go ahead and go back here. All right, so I went and collapsed everything here just to make it a little easier to see what we're working at. And let's go ahead and select this. We'll have to turn wrap on for the main container. Now we want to take a look at our height here, because right now we've got it at parent.height, and we need to change this so it is responsive. So we want to do if app.width less than 600, we want to do parent.height divided by 2. Otherwise, we want parent.height. We're going to go ahead and copy this, and we're going to put the same setting in here for this height value. All right, that works. Now, these buttons up here, depending on the size, because we're doing a percentage, right? So we're doing fill portions. This could potentially be smaller than this area. So we have to take a look at how this is going to be set up here. And right now we've got it as N for our justify, and we want to change that. So we're going to say if, and for this one, it's going to be our container activity form control activity screen dot width is less than the width of this times 2, 120, and we've got 10 there, and our right we've got 20. We're going to change this to 10 just to make sure we've got some more room here. And so 120 times 2, 240. So we'll say less than 260. We want to do layout, justify content center. Otherwise, we want to have it on the end. All right, let's go ahead and play that and see what these changes have resulted in. All right, so that actually looks pretty good. So it's basically splitting up 50-50. We might want to add a little bit of a gap between these inside the container. And if we go back here, ooh, it's pretty tight on these buttons here. What we might want to do is see if we can decrease this a little bit, just to give a little bit of space there. So let's see if we can make, we can make this button a little bit smaller. It doesn't have to be the exact same size. And that should give us plenty of room. So if we hit play now, yep, that is a little bit better on our space utilization there. All right, so that actually looks pretty good. Let's go to our window size. Yep, that looks good there. And if we go to canvas size, still looking pretty good. And iPhone 8, again, everything's looking pretty good. So our setup is pretty good here. We have to adjust this still. And if we hit add activity, that's essentially how we're going to submit our form. I think that actually looks pretty good. And we've got all the different options here that we would normally have. So we're looking good. Now, another thing we could do to fix this issue here is we could just use our icon option. So if we go with save, for example, here, we could use one of these. And let's go ahead and change our height to parent.height. Let's go ahead and copy that. And we do our width. And we'll do the same thing there for our width. And again, we'll change our color here. And let's go ahead and change our padding. We'll put 5 around. And let's get rid of our border. And let's go ahead and copy this over to our save buttons on select. And for our accessibility label, we'll go ahead and save activity. And put that in our tooltip as well. So then we can get rid of this button entirely. And we can just copy this. And for this one, we'll go with the add button again. And let's go ahead and copy this and change our on select. And then we can get rid of this button here. Let's just adjust our words here. Say add activity, and same thing here. All right, so now we've got those. Now we can adjust then what happened with our horizontal here. So we no longer need to have this. All we can do is remove this and it will look better just on the end like that. So now when we hit play on the app here, it'll always look like that. And that's not bad. That's a good compromise. If we do that, it'll fill that without any problems. Now it looks like we have to adjust this as well here, how this looks. Now this is probably because of the size of the screen. Is if we look at this, we set this to 600. Now 600 is not a lot of room to work with these two things. And we're basically saying divide it by 2 if it's less than 600, but we've still got this over here. So we probably need to increase this to probably 800. So let's go ahead and do that for both of these, and then we'll see what that looks like. So let's hit play. And there we go. So it's basically putting it on top of each other here. And if we switch back, everything looks fine there. And if we go to an iPad, everything looks fine there. Let's go ahead and rotate this. And everything's looking pretty good at 800. Let's try the iPhone 8 here. And let's try the iPhone 11. So yeah, right around 800 seems to be the magic sweet spot. Now, maybe it'd be better if we had side by side, if it was, say, 667 here, instead of top and bottom. No matter what, it's going to be kind of a tight fit. So if we split this in half, you're not going to have a lot of information over here, and you're not going to have a lot of information over here. So for a phone this small, there really isn't a perfect setup. And this is where I said it's really important to know what devices your organization has, because it's a lot easier to build this to what could be if you know exactly what everybody's going to be working with. This is a pretty small phone. We don't really use these small phones anymore. So I don't think this is a huge issue, but let's go ahead and take a look at some of these newer ones here. So if we go to, say, like a bigger phone here, it looks great on these setups. So I think we got a good happy medium here. It's just a little bit tight when we start getting into these really, really small phones. But I think that still works. I think that's probably the best option that we've got here for this. Now, you could also just set this that you just can't use it on a phone this small. And that might be the right answer, is for people that have phones this small, maybe it's just not going to work for them. But let's go ahead and close out of this. All right, so that's actually pretty good. Now, let's go ahead and select our containers here. So we've got both of these containers. Do we want to have a little bit of a gap here? I think we might want to have a small gap in between here. And we could go ahead and see what that looks like. So let's hit play. It's not going to do any favors for this really small screen here. Let's go ahead and go to a more reasonable size screen here. And that's actually not too bad. So a little bit of a gap in there. And again, we could add a little bit of color to the background to kind of differentiate that. So we went with this, and then we'll do a color here. Last time I think we went with this color, so we'll do that again. And then for this container, we'll go ahead and fill the color for this to white. And for this container, we'll do the same thing. So we'll set this to white. And let's go ahead and get rid of our borders again. And let's see how that looks. And that's not bad. I think that looks pretty good. But a lot of this is going to be just fine tuning. So if we go back to our home screen here. All right, so that looks a little bit better. Now let's go ahead and adjust our app picture also. So we add an image here. And there we go. Now we've got our image in here. And let's go ahead and close this. Yeah, I think this looks a little bit better for task completion. So I found that and thought that might look like a good one for this. And let's go back to our activity screen. And if we go ahead and play, we can say we're doing a lot better on our app design here. It looks pretty good on our responsive design here. So we can go back and forth between these screens. We have our back button. Everything is working as we want it to for the design of this. Now, one of the things that we can do here is, let's go ahead and add another item and test this out. So let's go ahead and do a test update. And then we'll do an area, same thing, we haven't added anything here. And then our estimated time, we'll say 20 minutes. And I can't go any further down, so we're gonna have to adjust this a little bit also in the settings. I can't get down here to adjust the toggles that we've got in here. So it's good that we tested that. Let's go ahead and close this. And let's go ahead and take a look at our form. Now our form height is what we're gonna take a look at here. So let's take our height over here, and we want this to be parent.height. Most of the time when I have an issue like this, it's usually a layout minimum width or minimum height. Usually a lot of times I set those to 0. Let's go ahead and check them. So in a responsive design, a 100 can actually cause this problem. So let's just put that to 0. And then let's check this one to 0 also. And layout minimum width, we'll set this to 0 also. Now for this one, for our layout minimum height, we have parent.height. But in this situation, we have another container in here. So we should actually not have that. We should have it as subtracting the container. So subtract this container, sidebar, activity screen dot height. All right, so let's take a look at these again. So we've got that at 0. We got that at 0. That at 0. That one I don't think will matter, but let's check. 0, 0, and then that. So let's check this. And let's see how we're doing. Yep. Everything is now fitting. Let's go ahead and check this view. And everything is again fitting. Now I might want to suggest maybe we change the size of these and give us a little bit more space here. But again, I think it's very unlikely that you would use a phone this small. So this is kind of the worst case scenario right here. More likely it's going to be like an iPhone 11. And that looks pretty good. And again, we can see everything the same way here. And if we go here again, we can scroll everything. Everybody is happy this is working. Now, we still need to take a look at what do we do with deletion. So we need to be able to delete something here. So we got to add a delete button on here. Now let's go ahead and add something. Test. And we've got our 20 seconds. And we'll do this one this time and hit save. Successfully updated, and now we've got our second item here. So everything is working. Let's go ahead and work on a delete button now. So we'll go ahead and copy this and paste. And let's go ahead and put this up here. And this will be our save activity screen. And then this will be our ICO add activity screen. And this will be ICO delete activity screen. And let's change this to the trash. And let's go ahead and adjust our accessibility and tooltip. Let's go ahead and do this. Now, the other thing you can do for these, you could also do self.tooltip, and then it would just be changing this one thing. I've been showing you the other way, but this is actually more efficient if you use this approach here. And then let's go back here. Everything's looking good. Let's take a look on our onSelect here. So we want to change this to remove daily task completions, and this will be our table dot selected. And let's go ahead and close that out. and that'll effectively delete the item. And after we do the delete, what we need to do is set this to new form. That way we're ready to go for adding another item right in there. So let's hit play. So if we hit we're on the test one, let's go ahead and delete that one. And we reset this, and now we're ready to go for adding another item right into there. And the reason why we did that is we don't want to have the unable to find or whatever, the getting the item logo here. Now what we could do is we could hide this form and display a text box also. That would also work for this situation here. All right, let's go to this view. Again, everything's looking pretty good. Let's go to our canvas size now. And our canvas size looks really good. We come into admin, we come into our home screen. All right, let's go back into our app here. I think we've got one or two small things to just adjust here. So we added these combo boxes. We forgot to say what happens when we select an item over here. We want it to display the item that was saved. So what we need to do is adjust our default selected item. And what we're going to do is go if it is blank, this item dot area. So basically the item that was selected, if it's blank here, we want it to be, again, blank. And if it isn't blank, then what we want to do is a lookup. And we'll go to our areas table here. And our title, we want it to be equal to this item dot area. And let's go ahead and close that out and finish this. And I think I forgot a comma here. There we go. All right, let's go ahead and copy that. And we're going to put that into here. So let's go to our default selected item and we'll paste that. And for this one, it is our sub area. And again, our sub area. And our sub area. All right. So now that we've got that in there, I think we're good. Now, one other thing I made a change to is in the onVisible property of the screen, I went ahead and added the new form. And what this is going to do is it's going to force the form to be in new form whenever the screen loads for the first time. So if there's nothing here or you've just opened up the app, we don't want it to say getting data. So we're just going to make it go straight into a new form situation right off the bat. I think that looks pretty good. Now, one other button we might want to add is a reset. So if we add, let's go ahead and copy this, put that in here, and let's go ahead and move this right up here, and we'll call this ICO reset activity screen. And we'll just put the cancel here. And we're going to say cancel updates. All right, and we want to go ahead and reset the form. There we go. Now, I don't know that we need to have this in there. So let's go ahead and close that. And what this is going to allow us to do is when I select this, nothing's happening. And it's because it's in new form. So we want to make sure when we select this, we already are saying edit the form when we're setting this. But what we need to do is actually reset the form. So that's what we're going to do here is if we reset this, it automatically picks up the variable that we created for this. So that's why we put that cancel button in there is we're just trying to force the reset of this form here. So that's why we did this is we can force that to reset. And we can also see that now our combo boxes are picking things up as well. Now, one other thing we want to do is in here, what if we don't have what we need? We want to make it easy for the user to be able to add a new area as well as a new sub area. Let's go ahead and copy this. It's our add is already here. And we'll go ahead and paste that in here. Now, obviously, we really don't need it to be nearly that big. Let's go ahead and shrink this down. And then we'll just clean up it once it looks around what we want it to be. So that looks like 32 by 27. Let's do 27 by 27. And what we want to have happen is we want to navigate to our area screen, and we'll do cover right. Now let's go ahead and copy this, and we're going to go put this in here also. And for this one, we want to go to our sub area screen. All right, now let's go ahead and play this and see how that looks. Well, all right, now we have to go through and change our accessibility labels. And for this one, we're just going to say self.tooltip to make it easier. I keep forgetting to do that. And then for here, all we have to do is add areas. And we'll do the same thing here. And then we do add sub areas. All right, I think we've got pretty much everything that we needed to do. Let's do a quick app checker. And we've got 2 performance issues. And this is going to be our global user. And this is, oh, we have an image that we don't need. So we can go ahead and clean that up. We'll go to our media here. And we can get rid of this one here. And now we're ready to publish. And then we're going to go actually check this out in play mode. And I'll show you one other trick that you can take use of as well. So let's go publish this. All right, so here is our app. Now, as you can see, we have the URL link up here. You can get rid of this top nav bar here. If you go up here and we do hide nav bar and hit enter. And when you do that, you get rid of your nav bar at the top here. So again, all you do is add that hide nav bar at the top equals true, and you can get rid of that. A lot of times you don't need that, and it gives you more screen real estate to show your app. And I think it just looks a little bit cleaner for the design also. All right, so now let's go check out our activity. Now, unfortunately, we didn't set this using responsive, and that's a common issue when you do responsive apps. When you just drop something in there, you actually have to account for where it needs to be through responsive variables. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to adjust that after this video is done. But yeah, that would be something that I've made that mistake quite a few times. And what happens now is you come in here and you only see one option. It's not what you're looking for. So you need to be able to add it. So you can click this here, and now you can add that area, right? And let's go ahead and add team meeting and hit save. And then we can go back. And if we come into our area here, we now have team meeting as an option. So, and it works the same way when you do the sub area. So it's just a little bit more convenient for the user that they can come in here and do all that information right here without having to go back to the admin and then click another button. So it's a little bit more convenient or user friendly. Now, another thing you could do if you didn't like going to the admin menu is you can actually create this as a component right in here and then pop it up, add it, and then you don't even have to leave the screen. So that's always a great option also, especially for something this simple where you're really just adding something. But the trade-off is that sometimes you could hit the add button thinking that you haven't added it yet, and it is there, and you just didn't do the research to make sure that it wasn't there, because this list could get pretty long. But that's an option too, and I've used that quite a bit also, is you just put it as a pop-up and add it, especially for, again, something so simple where it's just one field. It makes sense to put it down here. The one thing you got to be careful of, especially with bigger apps and bigger designs, is the more stuff that you put on your screen, the complexity score for that screen can exceed the 300 that Microsoft sets for it. So that's kind of the trade-off with that. And through the miracle of editing, I went through and set this as a responsive variable so that the X is correct when we come in here. Now, if we go to the admin area, we're not going to have time in this video to explain doing the weekly update or the evaluation of Power Automates for sending an email and that kind of stuff. So I'll do that in a future video, but we would just add buttons here and then you'd be able to setting when you want these things to go essentially, but I'll explain that again in a future video. But that's pretty much it for this video. Sorry it's so long. It does take a really long time to build an entire app. Not to mention the video is long, but there's a lot of obviously editing and work that goes into making one of these 2-hour videos. So it does take up a lot of time to create these. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. It really does help the channel grow. My goal right now is to hit 1,000 subscribers. So I really appreciate it if you could help me hit that objective. All right, that's it for today. Until next time.